Hello everybody. So this video is going to be all about potential reasons for prejudice, or reasons that have been identified in the past to contribute to prejudice. So we're going to talk about three potential reasons. First, the Justification-Suppression Hypothesis. So according to the Justification-Suppression Hypothesis, in general, because racism is a devalued trait, and so nobody wants to be labeled racist, there is in general a tendency for people to suppress ideas that are racist, so ideas that are prejudiced towards a particular group. Because again, there's this in our culture, there's a value of being egalitarian, and so people suppress any non-egalitarian ideas they might have. But this suppression is laborious. It takes energy, and we don't have unlimited energy to expend on constantly suppressing these ideas that we might have. So when we find some little justification for a particular prejudiced idea, for example, a racist idea or a sexist idea, then we will tend to latch on to whatever that justification for that racist idea is, because now it's no longer, we can convince ourselves that it's no longer a racist idea, it's just fact. So no longer do we have to suppress this belief because it would impugn our being egalitarian. It would suggest that we're not indeed egalitarian. Now we can state make the prejudice statement and hold the prejudice belief without reservation because it's justified. So according to the Justification-Suppression Hypothesis, we will suppress our non-egalitarian views until we find justification for it. And once we've found justification for it, we will express it because it allows us to no longer suppress it. All right. So one reason prejudice might occur, people might espouse prejudice beliefs, is because they don't want to expend the energy necessary to suppress their prejudice ideas, and so they look for justification. And once they found it, they no longer feel the need to suppress it. Another reason why groups may feel prejudice towards one another is proposed by the realistic conflict theory. Realistic conflict theory argues that in a world of limited resources, various groups may come into conflict with one another. Now, as long as the resources for those limited resources, as long as the resources are plentiful enough to amply provide for all groups involved, a realistic conflict theory would argue that very little intergroup conflict will occur, and therefore very little prejudice will occur. But when resources become more restricted, then the competition between the groups who are relying on those resources grows. And so realistic conflict theory argues that prejudice facilitates this intergroup conflict. If your group is competing with my group for limited resources, and there's not enough resources to go around, then I'm going to have to take resources from you so that my family can have those resources. That means I'm going to have to go into conflict with you. This, or at least it increases the likelihood of my going into conflict with you. It's going to be hard to disadvantage your family if I like you. So by having a negative evaluation of you, it's going to be more easy to disadvantage you, take resources from your group so that my group, my family, can have those resources. So the idea is that when resources are limited, and they aren't ample enough, all resources are limited, but when the resources available aren't enough to amply supply all groups, those groups become more prejudiced towards one another so as to facilitate conflict between them. And then the third reason for prejudice that we're going to cover is the scapegoat theory. So scapegoat theory argues that when we encounter negative situations such as threat, economic decline, any kind of difficulty in life, we tend to look for some reason, something to attribute our life difficulties to other than us. So, you know, if, and sometimes difficulty is largely random, but we tend to not be comfortable with randomness. We tend to prefer to identify reasons for events. It gives us a greater degree of certainty. And so we will look for someone to attribute our difficulty to. We look for a scapegoat, a way to explain away our difficulty. And so, according to the scapegoat theory, we often use outgroups or other social groups that we don't belong to as scapegoats. So we blame our difficulties on them, which makes us evaluate them negatively, thus generating negative prejudice towards them. And that is that. So we've discussed 3 potential reasons why we are prejudiced. 1, the Justification-Suppression Hypothesis. 2, realistic conflict theory. And 3, scapegoat theory. And that's all I wanted to discuss for this video. If you have any questions, please send them my way. Other than that, take it easy.